Started in just a minute. This is our monthly digital inclusion working group for libraries. These are informal peer-to-peer meetings, so please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat or come off mute and introduce yourself. Taylor has a colleague. At any point, if you want to ask questions, either via chat or coming off mute, that's also welcome. Today we have featured speakers James Neal from the IMLS and Kate Tachik-Sweeney from Candid. They're going to be talking to us about applying for federal grants. So I'm glad everyone made it here today. We will start with a few policy updates and announcements, and also if anyone has announcements of your own, we can start there. Hey, Don. Good to see you.
Hey.
Hey, Lo. Hey, Sahana. Hey, Jill. Hey, Andrea. Hey, Liz. We're going to get started officially in just a minute or so, but we can take this time if anyone wants to introduce themselves either via chat or coming off mute. All is welcome. Or if you have announcements or updates you want to share, digital equity work you're doing at your library, we'd love to hear it.
I'll go. I'm getting ready for Digital Inclusion Week now. It almost killed me last year. Literally. So I'm getting the work done, started now so that it's not quite as arduous. So
good to hear, Dawn. Is that coming up in May?
oh, it's October. I'm not sure if we're going to start it on May 30th or October 7th. I would think they would start it on October 7th, but I don't make those decisions.
I see.
Let me check for you, Don. I know it's already on my calendar as we have the official hold, no vacation, no time off during Digital Inclusion Week, unless you are going to celebrate a digital inclusion experience. They make exceptions for us to have fun. So let me check on those dates for you. I'll share them in the chat.
Awesome. Yeah, Lowe's doing fun stuff in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. Cool. Nice. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for being here. We're getting started here. Feel free to continue to unmute yourself and say hi, share an announcement or something you're working on, or to type in the chat to say hi or to ask a question, share anything you're working on. These are our monthly peer-to-peer digital inclusion working group meetings. We focus on a digital inclusion topic relevant to libraries each month. We have featured presenters each month. If you would ever like to be a featured presenter, you're doing something cool at your library that you want to share, let me and Emily know. This month we have James Neal from the IMLS and Kate Tachik-Sweeney from Candid to talk to us about applying for federal grants. So we'll hear from them in just a minute. Lo says that Digital Inclusion Week is October 7th through 11th. Awesome. We have a few announcements and updates on our end, so I'll get started with those. But like I said, if anyone has questions or something to share, feel free to chime in. First of all, we have a YouTube page. So we are recording these meetings. So if you've missed any past meetings, you can check those on our YouTube page. I can drop the link in the chat to that. We also have a Connect space. So many of you might have found this Zoom link from Connect, but if not, Connect is our discussion board where we post resources, ask questions, and can engage in conversation kind of asynchronously on an ongoing basis. So if you haven't joined our Connect space yet, please do. It's a great place to connect with colleagues around the country. ALA has digital equity resource page that we are continuously updating. You can find some of our most recent info here, as well as how to find the Connect space. And let's see, I think those are my general updates before we move to policy updates. I see lots of people chiming in the chat. So thanks, everyone. Yes, Dawn, yes, I Emily got that. Thank you. Great. Let's start with Learn Without Limits updates. So Learn Without Limits is the FCC initiative to create broadband connectivity outside of the school or library. The Wi-Fi on school buses order was released and passed in January, I want to say, but has been facing legal challenges. Here for libraries, we have been monitoring closely the hotspot lending initiative that to be part of E-rate. We had been hearing that it was coming soon, so we're now hoping that that they will vote on that in May at the May FCC meeting, and we are preparing accordingly. So stay tuned for that. We'll have a number of resources related to that to help libraries think about applying for hotspots as part of their E-rate. We have heard that some pieces of good news and some pieces of bad news related to hotspot lending. So we have asked for the commission to make the record keeping less burdensome and to really be concerned about patron privacy. And we think that there will be some elements that are more friendly to libraries in terms of how to keep records and what they need in terms of tracking inventory. We've been told it will not be a copy of ECF and that they have made some improvements based on that. So we're crossing our fingers there. We are less hopeful about the technology neutral piece. So a lot of libraries during ECF used funding to create CBRS systems or other alternative technology solutions that were maybe more cost effective or just made better sense where you live in your geography. It doesn't sound like in this first version of the order, they are going to consider anything for E-rate beyond just hotspots. We will continue conversations on that, but that's what we're hearing as of now. And like I said, we're hoping to see a draft actually, probably in early May if everything goes well. So cross your fingers there. And we will have, like I said, resources available on that as we know more. Any questions or comments on the hotspot lending? Okay. Just a couple of other quick announcements. Many of you might have seen that they did vote on net neutrality at the April FCC meeting. So that was passed by a vote of 3-2, which is really good news. The net neutrality rules will go into effect 60 days after it's published in the Federal Register. So coming soon. And this basically just reclassifies the internet, the broadband as Title II, which makes it something that the FCC can oversee and regulate, and means that there won't be sort of slowdowns or chokeholds on any kind of information. Everything will be treated equally. So we're really excited about that. We've been celebrating that news here. And we will have probably some resources. Our comments are available on our website if anyone's interested in that. Chugging right along here, many of you are probably following the digital equity grants. The capacity grant is out. Many states are responding to that. We have a resource available for libraries that are thinking about the Digital Equity Act and getting involved with their state on the capacity grant. So stay there or check that out. The states have a May 28th deadline. So that's coming up in terms of getting their plan back to the NTIA. And so we have heard that some states have already submitted their plans. And so we know that the NTIA has started the process of reviewing the plans, and we expect that we will hear about approvals of some of those plans soon. And then for those of you that have been monitoring this, or maybe were part of our Digital Equity Act meeting last month, we know that that means that will kickstart the Digital Equity Act competitive grant process. And so the NOFO will have to follow shortly from there. We know it'll kickstart that within the 30-day window. So keep your eye on that. We expect a lot of movement coming there in the next several months. And then finally, many of you know, of course, today is the last day of the ACP. There are a number of bills in Congress. This has bipartisan support. There are a number of supporters that still really are fighting for an affordable internet at-home program. So you can continue to go to don'tdisconnectus.com to show your support there. ALA was part of a rally today in DC. Several commissioners from the FCC were there, as well as folks from NDIA, Public Knowledge, Common Sense Media, and Senator Peter Welch. So it was a great event, and there's still a lot of people that really care about this and hope to see it come through one of the bills and packages that are moving through Congress now. So stay tuned, but as of now, yeah, the wind down is official. And I will turn it to Emily for our next couple of announcements.
Thanks, Megan. I just have two quick announcements so that we can get to James and Kate. So last week I posted a link to a survey in the Connect group. So Benton Institute for Broadband and Society, in collaboration with ALA, NDIA, and Metropolitan New York Library Council, are examining the work of people such as librarians and digital navigators who help connect others to broadband. So if your library works in any of these areas, would encourage you to kind of take this survey. So data collected from the survey will be used to kind of better understand and support the work of connecting people to broadband moving forward, and really looking at kind of sustainability of this work. And survey data will also be contributed to a public report, and some recommendations will come out of that. So I will drop the link to that survey in the chat, as well as their email if you have any questions about the survey or anything related to that. Next, we are going to get to our June meeting at Annual. So this group will be meeting in person at Annual Conference in San Diego in June. So we are still confirming the official date that we will be meeting. It will either be Friday, June 28th or Monday, July 1st. As soon as we know that information, we will let you know and post in the Connect space, and we'll talk about it during our May meeting. And there's also some available other programs related to digital equity and inclusion at ALA Annual, including Leverage Up Your Digital Equity Efforts with Federal Investments for All Fund, which is a program that will take place on Saturday, June 29th, and The Future is Universal, which is Inclusive Changes to E-Rate, which will take place on Sunday, June 30th, and that's Megan's program. I will drop all of this in the chat, and will also be available for notes afterwards. I don't know if there's any other quick notes around Annual or any questions around that before I turn it over to Kate and James.
Okay, I think that means Kate, you can take it away. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Emily. James, did you want to say anything before I take it away?
Go ahead and do your thing. Thanks.
Cool. All right. Well, it's great to see you all. It's great to be with you. I'm Kate Tatchik-Sweeney. I'm the Senior Director of Development at Candid. I'm going to be talking to you today a bit about the proposal writing process. My focus is primarily on writing proposals for foundations, but pulling together a proposal for a foundation or for an institutional funder is a really helpful start to preparing to apply for federal grants as well. So in talking to James, he thought it'd be helpful to go through this. I am not going to go into granular detail in each slide of this training, because it's available to you online as well at learning.candid.org. So I'd love for you all to check that out. And I'll talk a little bit more about Candid in just a second. But just a bit on my background. I'm also a librarian. I recognize a couple names on here, which is nice to see. I started out with Candid actually prior to us becoming Candid. I worked for Foundation Center, if anybody remembers that name from way back. I was a librarian in our San Francisco-based Foundation Center office for a couple of years before moving on to work with what at the time was known as the Funding Information Network, which was Foundation Center's network of library partners that provided access to Foundation Directory and other tools to their community. Today, it's called the Candid Community. I'll talk about that as well. I left Candid for a few years, did some development work for St. John's College here in Maryland, and now I'm thrilled to be back in kind of this new function with Candid again, but even happier to be talking to a group of library professionals today about raising funding for a really important part of our community. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen here, ideally the right screen. Okay, cool. Done it. You're all seeing Introduction to Proposal Writing. You're not seeing my presenter view. I did it. I pretty much can end this thing happy. Okay, so Intro to Proposal Writing. So you may or may not be familiar with Candid, but we are the result of the 2019 merger of Foundation Center, which has historically produced resources like Foundation Directory that you can use to search for grant makers in your community, as well as GuideStar, which you might be familiar with, as it is the database where nonprofits maintain their profiles that funders use to do due diligence and so on. It's totally okay if you don't know what those things are. No worries at all. Basically, what you need to know is that we're an infrastructure organization that provides data on giving to the social sector, of which libraries are a part. You can find us at more than 1,200, actually, I think this number is closer to 1,400 locations in the US and Mexico. It does indeed include some of the organizations that you all represent on this call. So your location may have access to our tools on site that you're providing that support to local nonprofits in your community. The nice thing for libraries is when you have Foundation Directory in-house, it means you get to use it for your grant seeking needs as well. And I would encourage you to do so. If you have a foundation, it's likely that they're using that tool in their fundraising. I will just say briefly about Foundation Directory and GuideStar. We are in the process of merging. We actually have merged the data and are working on releasing a unified platform, the Candid platform, later this year into Q1 of 2025, which means when you go to candid.org, you would be able to access all of the data that you found on either of those databases in one place. The beta is released, so you're welcome to go to beta.candid.org if you're especially eager to try that out. But just for those of you that are already familiar with these tools, that's really something that's helpful for you to know. For the purposes of our time together today, once we get through this training, we're going to go through the basic elements of a proposal, how to start the proposal, the next steps for submitting, and what your follow-up looks like when you hear back from a funder. So the writing process, of course, as we all know, I'm sure many of us have put together proposals before. The writing is just one part of the proposal process. So this is a multi-step process that can take quite a bit of time, from the planning to the research to the writing and the follow-up. The planning, of course, is a really important step in this, in really determining what you need funding for. So identifying what the programming is and what type of money that you need. So some programs are going to appeal to different types of funders in different ways. And I think James is going to be really helpful towards the end of this call in identifying some of the projects that IMLS in particular is looking to fund. Foundations in your community are going to identify the sort of projects that they're interested in funding. So you want to take a lot of care in working across your organization to determine what programs are fundable, and who you want to approach for them, which takes you to your research piece, which is not where we're going to spend our time today, but there are tools like Foundation Directory and others that you can use to research those funding opportunities in your community. Finally, how we're going to put it all together in the writing. That's what we're going to talk about on this call, is the actual writing process and pulling together a proposal. And then once the decision has been made, what the follow-up will be, whether you get the yes or the no, because there are actions that we take regardless of the outcome. There's a follow-up after you submit a proposal. We cannot emphasize enough when applying to, and this applies to all grants of all types, whether they are government grants or private grants, to always follow the funder's guidelines, to check and recheck and check again that you have not overlooked something in the submission process that is going to be that easy toss out of your hard work and proposal. So always for foundation funders as well, I always, I spend my days working with program officers at foundations. These are typically, overworked nonprofit professionals, like many of the rest of us in the field. And they're going through a lot of proposals. They're reading a lot of submissions. They're trying to get through it. And if they come across someone that hasn't followed the process, that's an easy way to make that choice and move on to the next process or the next project. So please, please, please always double, triple check the guidelines in the process. Many grant makers, just like government grant makers, will use an online format, but some won't. You'll still have funders in your community that are old school and that you are going to be mailing a proposal packet to. It still happens. I did that as in a consulting role, but sometimes those funders can really be still a great assist for your library, for your project. So you don't want to disregard them, but they may not have a specific format and they might not have an online form. Regardless, you want to have a boilerplate proposal that you can customize to send to different funders. And again, this is a great starting place even for a federal grant like IMLS, where you have a starting place from. And I use this, my team at Candid in our fundraising efforts really use our boilerplate proposal as kind of our organizing document for where we start all other proposals. So we're all working from kind of the same starting point. And then we customize it depending on the project or depending on the funder. But it's really good to have that. We update it annually. It also helps to inform our annual report because we're saying, okay, this is what we wanted to achieve this year in our 2023 proposal. We use that to inform what goes into our 2023 annual report. And then we recreate it the next year. So creating kind of this system year to year and keeping that updated means you're also not starting from scratch every time, which is really helpful. So our typical proposal elements include the following: our executive summary, the narrative, which is the real meat of the proposal, which includes our compelling statement of need. We'll talk about all of these, project description, organizational information, conclusion, budget, and supporting materials. Our executive summary, of course, might come in the form of a cover letter where it's recapping everything else that we see in the proposal. One piece that is not on here that is my personal plea of all proposal writers, including myself, my staff, other folks that I do boot camp trainings with, is starting every proposal at least to a foundation funder with a top paragraph that says who you are, how much you're asking for, and what the project is. I want a funder to know within seconds of looking at the page what I'm asking for. I don't want to have to read down 3 paragraphs to finally know that you're asking for $10,000 to do an adult literacy training. I want to know that immediately. And then I'm hooked. I want to know more about you. I want to know about the project. I want to know all the details. Do not be afraid to put a dollar amount in the first 2 sentences. It's very similar to a cover letter for a job. You want to really convey that immediate sense of who you are and what you're looking to do. And then we can go on and elaborate. So I even, all these things are important, but please have that really first big compelling paragraph where you convey all of that. And feel free to stop me if you're getting a question that I need to answer mid presentation. Happy to do that. I can't see anything else but my slide deck right now. So here are the elements that funders really want to know. What specific need are you addressing? What's the problem? When we're approaching a funder, we really want to feel empowered that we're coming with information that is valuable to them. When we're talking about foundation funders, they exist to serve either a geographic population, an issue area, or both. And they are looking to nonprofits or to other community-based organizations like libraries to inform them of problems that need solving. Some funders already have an awareness of those problems, and that's why they exist. That's why they set up these funds. But we want to make sure that we're articulating what the need is to that funder, and that your solution is right sized to help tackle that problem. We're not going to solve all the digital inclusion needs of the world, but we can solve this problem for this county in the following ways, if that makes sense. We always want to right size what we're trying to do. We want those outcomes to be measurable. That's probably, this is important to foundation funders. It's definitely important in the context of IMLS grants. And I'm sure James has lots of good advice on outcomes for the federal framework, which is typically much more robust than what the expectation is of a foundation funder. But still, our outcomes must be measurable. We want to be able to show what's going to happen as the result of our efforts. And then what are the strategies for getting to those outcomes? So we want a section that clearly details the hows and the whys and the what's, where it's going to happen, who's going to do it. This is typically an area where you really want to emphasize any collaborations or partnerships that you have in your community or with other organizations. Foundations love to see that you're working with other organizations. They also love to know if you have other funding. Don't come into this in a scarcity mindset. Government funding is the same way. They want to know that other folks are at the table, that this is a sustainable project that has collaborators both financially as well as programmatic. Along the same lines, if you believe that your project is replicable and can be a model, that's really important to include in this section as well. And I know that's something that IMLS and other federal grant agencies are looking for as well. So we want to demonstrate that your organization or project will have long-lasting, far-reaching impact. You're going to want to be able to articulate how you know if you will be successful. So specifying the program objectives in really measurable terms. So specifying, something that you've done that can indicate the key indicators of success based on your goals and objectives. Some things are easier to measure than others. But you want to be able to include both quantitative, so a few numbers of what you're going to achieve, as well as the qualitative, which could be an improvement. So if it is a literacy class, being able to show, okay, that, we conveyed this and this is the evidence of learning, not just based on we had 10 people in class, but 7 of those 10 people understood something more at the end of this class than they did at the beginning. So you can do that through really simple surveys and data collections. Keep it simple, keep it something that you can manage, but you want to include that as part of your narrative as well. I typically think that when we talk about why your organization is the best to do this work, this should fall kind of in the latter half of your narrative. But at some point, you are going to want to give some information about who your organization is. I often see in proposals, this happens up towards the beginning. But again, that kind of buries the lead a little bit. You want to really talk about your program, what you're trying to do, and then talk about kind of yourself and why you're best posed to do it. So at some point, you're going to need to do that. And this is where you're going to talk about your mission, your organizational history. You might have the opportunity to state your mission statement further up, but the big details on who you are and why you're best positioned to do this can come a little further along in that narrative. So talk about your organizational history, some of your other programs and services, recent accomplishments. This is the bragging spot. You can brag here. That's okay. Be really proud of what you've done and accomplished. If you are new and you don't have kind of much of a track record in this area, that's okay. This is where you talk about where you have some collaborations in the works, or even in conversation with some other organizations. That's a great place to start as well. You might have the opportunity to submit letters of support along with your proposal. Those are all great things to kind of back up your track record here as well. And then again, we want to talk about how this project is sustainable in the long run. So thinking about how this is core to the work of your library, that there's a plan for this to continue beyond 1 year. Foundations tend to think in long term. They tend to think as the grant as an investment. They also, and that's an opportunity for you as well to think about, you're asking not just for a 1-year grant possibly, but for the start of a relationship and possibly a renewable grant. My advice here as well is to think about the budget piece, which we aren't going to talk about in detail today, but there are other resources on Candid around budgeting. But one shift that we have made at Candid as a nonprofit in the development work that we do is we are really pushing and asking for unrestricted grants as often as possible. And we are asking for that funding to be, at least even if it's project-based, to be budget relieving. We have a number of projects, and it's probably the case for your libraries, that this is work that you're planning to do. The library wants to do this work. The library is budgeting to do this work, potentially. So we're asking for foundation support that will help offset that budget versus fund it as a discrete project that's entirely restricted. This is a difficult conversation to have with some foundations because some foundations are restricted on the type of giving that they do. But when we talk about sustainability, I think we all know that we'd rather see projects that are in our organizational budget get funding because we know they are able to continue year to year rather than those one-off projects. So that's always a conversation to initiate internally if possible, just thinking about like, how would we, if we did get a grant for a year to do this, what does that mean for next year? So some of that is obviously an external conversation, but some of that is internal as well, and talking to leadership and talking about like, how do we make this sustainable over time? Some foundations or most foundations are going to ask for, lots of financials and things like that, which is fine. But I think being smart about how you position the budget and your ask, and talking, being honest with program officers, if you are able to engage them in conversations about the possibility of, unrestricted or budget relieving funds to offset staff time and so on as a part of this grant, can be really helpful in sustaining it over time and possibly engaging that foundation further over time as well. So that is a bit. One thing I wanted to just add here is that foundations, typically do due diligence. Libraries are in, kind of a unique thing here. Not all libraries are nonprofits, but most libraries have a nonprofit arm, be it their foundation or friends or another group. We'd always recommend that these organizations claim their profile on Candid. That's where foundations might go to review to do their due diligence on that organization. This also makes your organization findable to other entities in your community through donor advised funds and so on. So you want to make sure you can ask this of your, foundation staff or your friends, volunteers, just to make sure they're leveraging these resources, because if you get a foundation grant, it's most likely going to come in through the 501c3 arm of your library. We have these different seals of transparency based on how much information you share on your on the nonprofit profile. Just as a quick note, on the gold seal here, for any nonprofit that has a budget of less than $1 million, which I'm guessing many of our friends groups out there are, you can claim a year of Foundation Directory Essential for free. So if this is not a resource that your library is paying for, but you're looking for access to that grant seeking tool, if you make sure that you claim up to that gold seal of transparency, you would be able to access that at no cost. So you could do more research on foundations and funders in your community. Not going to go into this too much more, but another benefit, this is the visibility part that I was speaking about, is we have an extensive data network. So when your friends group, when your foundation is on the nonprofit profile, that means they're findable via these different avenues. So if your library can get donations via Apple Pay, that means that you're on Candid. You can only get donations via Apple Pay if you have claimed your Candid nonprofit profile. For individuals in your community that are leveraging donor advised funds, they can see you are visible through your Candid profile through these different tools like Fidelity and so on, different giving platforms, different grant management systems. This is important to know because foundations are leveraging that in their research as well. So they might be able to automatically pull your data in through those systems and tools. It's pretty easy to do that. You can learn more on Candid. We're not going to go through that whole thing. Help.candid.org. You can find more information about claiming the seal. Anyways, back to wrapping up our proposal writing conversation so James can share his words of wisdom with you. Always want to tailor a bit of this. I like to do it in the introduction and the conclusion. I like to go to the funder's website, grab a little couple words from their mission, plug it into the intro and into the conclusion so that there's a tie back and saying why you're asking them for funding in particular. We don't want to leave them out. We want them to know why you're approaching them. You're approaching them because they care about your community. You're approaching them because they said they've cared about digital access. Make that kind of clear, especially at the very beginning and the very end. Your executive summary is what it is. You're reducing everything to one page. Tends to be easier to write this once you've written the proposal, so you can go in and pull out those highlights. Some people do the opposite. They start short and then they broaden it. That's kind of up to you as a writer, but you want to include in that executive summary your statement of need, the name of the project, brief description, goals and objectives, and how much you're asking for. You don't have to take notes on everything I'm saying. You'll get these slides. All of this is online at learning.candid.org. So please don't worry about every detail of this. You can get quite a bit more of that on Candid's resources. For any supporting materials, please never bombard a funder with 100 attachments or like a phone book worth of documents in the mail. Again, follow the funder's guidelines, include what they ask for, and very little of anything else. If there's an optional add-in, you want to throw in an annual report or a funder report from another project that was funded, sometimes that can be a really nice add-in. Do that, but I would limit it to only one extra beyond what they have asked for. Definitely add links. You can link things in an online application. That's a great way to kind of get in some more stuff. But as always, we are defaulting to following the funder's guidelines. Very quickly on the follow-up, because we're getting short on time. If the answer is yes, congratulations. So proud of you. You've got that grant. That's so awesome. We're feeling good. What you want to do now is really hang on to that relationship. Make sure you're keeping the funder informed. Be responsive when they ask for updates. If they want a picture, if they want to include something in their annual reports, do what you said you were going to do. That's a good one. Spend the money on what you said you were going to spend the money on. And also I would say, don't panic if things change. If something changes, if you said you were going to do something with that money and now you're like, hey, this isn't quite working out, I need to make an adjustment, talk to your program officer, tell them what's going on. Most foundations are really amenable to the fact that, to the reality of like things change. Hey, we risked this, but we've got this other opportunity. We got to spend this money in a slightly different way. Typically, the money is out the door. The program officer it's okay. It's okay for things to change. And some grant agreements even allow you to make changes without contacting them if it's within 10%. But I would say it's always a great opportunity to contact them when you can have that conversation. If the answer is no, I had one of these conversations last week. It's not personal. It's a best practice to reach out and see if you can get any feedback on your proposal. I had a really great conversation with a program officer that had to decline us this year. And it ended with him honestly racking his brains about the different ways that he could engage with us through contractual training and other things. So, you know, I'm full of hope actually for approaching this funder next year, but definitely reach out to see if you can find out why and inquire about the next round of funding that will become available. Very often a funder really regrets that they can't fund all of the great work happening in their community. So it's good to stay on their radar and keep you in mind. And of course, keep on keeping on, keep applying, keep looking, keep asking. So I think I'm going to stop there. The end of this is just kind of key takeaways, wrap up, and so on. But I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing so that we have some time for James to share his piece, and then I can take questions as well.
Thanks so much, Kate. I believe Megan is gonna pull up some slides for me. And just to let everyone know, I met Kate in 2017 or 2018 out in Seattle for ALA midwinter. She moderated a panel that I was on for top tech trends and technology. And we've kept in touch ever since then. And I really want to thank her with extreme gratitude for what she just delivered. It's the gospel truth. Almost everything that she said, I corroborate and fully support. And I would advise you to take heed of the direction that she has given. I'm not going to focus too much on the mechanics of grant writing per se in this presentation. I will come back to this group again for a more hands-on, detailed-oriented how to write a proposal for IMLS specifically. But today I wanted to demystify and take away some of the mystery around federal grant writing and grant fund making. The Institute of Museum and Library Services, where I work, is a very interesting organization. So next slide, please. So let's think about preparation and some of the things that Kate talked about. One of the first things that I would advise someone to do is to approach an IMLS program officer. There are 5 program officers on my team, and we all sit behind spreadsheets and are in meetings and on email and in calendars, but we all like to talk to librarians who have needs or their communities have certain desires. And I, for one, am extremely social and gregarious and love meeting new people and love talking to librarians about what's going on in their worlds. It is a great way to learn about what IMLS is interested in funding. So that's the first thing. But one of the other things that you can do, or several other things that you can do, is we have a search awarded grants database on our website that has PDF files of proposals that have been successfully funded. That's a great way to get a start of looking at how things are formatted, how proposals are written. You also want to be sure that you're applying to the right programs. And I'll get into the IMLS programming in a moment. We also have informational webinars throughout the year. We do have a YouTube channel as well. Some of the webinars are located there. We have a new applicant webinar. So if you're not familiar with how to apply to IMLS, you can participate in one of those webinars. And again, contact an IMLS program officer. You're going to learn more. You're going to get solid advice, and you're going to find out answers to specific questions. And this is something that Kate spoke of, and I've got a brief typo in here that I'll have to correct eventually. But make the very first sentence of your narrative akin to a mini abstract by saying who is applying, what program you're applying to, how much money are you applying for, what's the title of your proposal, and those types of things in the very first line of a proposal really helps the program officer and the reviewers who will be reviewing the proposals to not have to look for that really pertinent information. It also helps the IMLS director, who is the final authority and decision maker when it comes to IMLS funding. Another thing that you can also do is throughout the fiscal year, when we're having proposals under consideration, it's a 2-phase process. The applicants submit a 2-page proposal in mid to late September, and they hope to be invited to submit a full proposal, usually in February or March, of 10 pages. So we use peer reviewers to evaluate those proposals. And one of the best things a potential applicant could do is to serve as a peer reviewer. It's a great way to get to know IMLS, to get to know a program officer, see what proposals are out there, what people are thinking, and then see how IMLS prioritizes its work. Next slide, please. So what is IMLS? The Institute of Museum and Library Services. It's a federal agency within the United States government. It is not under any particular department. We are our own entity. We are known as a petite federal agency, meaning that we're small, but we're powerful and very potent. There's about 80 full-time employees, distributed workforce that came about during the pandemic, extremely diverse through a lot of programs and initiatives under the Harris-Biden administration. We were able to bring in people of color in several positions of power, and we also have numerous staff representing all sorts of backgrounds and perspectives on life. We were established in 1996. The most important thing to remember is that IMLS is the primary source of federal support for the nation's libraries and museums, and also archives. Next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about our vision and mission at IMLS. We are visionary. We're constantly thinking about futures and thinking about how we can work together to transform the lives of individuals and communities and organizations across the nation. We are out there to advance, support, and empower America's museums, libraries through grant making, research, and policy development. Next slide, please. So what do we do at the Institute of Museum and Library Services? We make grants primarily. We give out money to libraries, archives, and museums that want to do things within their communities. Through our grant making, we are often creating policy. We are not an official policy making organization, but obviously through the types of projects that we fund, we are making some sense of policy. We also host convenings in DC, at professional conferences, and within our states across the nation. We're also involved in several national initiatives and partnerships. I'll talk about that a little bit later. And we also have an Office of Research and Evaluation that provides research, statistics, and publications. You're probably familiar with the Public Library Survey that's done through our Office of Research and Evaluation. Next slide, please. One of the initiatives that yes? One of the initiatives that we were recently focusing on at IMLS was the idea of literacy. Our former director, Crosby Kemper, was very interested in libraries maintaining a focus on basic literacy. So we held a convening at Planet Word, which is a museum of language in Washington, D.C. This was, I think, in 21 or 22, shortly after the pandemic started waning. This was the first time we had seen each other in about 2.5 years. So there's my staff at Empowering Readers, Empowering Citizens. Next slide, please. At Empowering Readers, Empowering Citizens, we were asking ourselves, what kinds of grant making or research should IMLS prioritize to advance literacy? And we, of course, got into very many discussions about the various types of literacy, but we were focused on basic reading and writing skills. Next slide, please. We are currently involved in a federal wide initiative called the Information Literacy Task Force. And IMLS is developing a web presence website that will have numerous resources that's currently in the works, so be on the lookout for it. And we're approaching, issues of misinformation and disinformation. Next slide, please. Within my organization, there are two sides of the house, as it were, the Office of Museum Services and then the Office of Library Services. I work in the Office of Library Services. Within the Office of Library Services, there are two main divisions. One is grants to states. These are formula-based block grants that are annually given to state libraries across the nation. This is the work that the Grants to States team is involved in. They are a staff of 5 people and very, very friendly. I think all of them are librarians except for our program specialists. Next slide, please. I work in what's called the discretionary division of IMLS, meaning we are involved with grant applications and competitive discretionary decision making. Within our discretionary programs, there are 2 major efforts. The first is the National Leadership Grants for Library Program. This involves addressing critical needs of libraries and archives that hopes to advance, practice, and strengthen library and archival services for the American public. Successful proposals, which will eventually become grants, should generate results that become new models, replicable models, tools, research findings, services, practices, and form alliances that can be widely used, adapted, scaled, or replicated to extend and leverage the benefits of federal investment. That's NLG, National Leadership Grants for Libraries. Our other program is called the Laura Bush 21st Century Librarian Program. The focus here is on the training and professional development of library and archives professionals. We hope to be able to provide the professional development, recruiting, cohort building, to build a very robust and diverse library and archival workforce to meet the information needs of our communities across the nation. Next slide, please. In 2015, pre-pandemic, IMLS created a strategic plan that was called Building Digital Communities, recognizing that libraries were a key part of what we know as digital inclusion and what has become digital equity. We're very proud of the work that we've done to support libraries in this area. Next slide, please. When I started at IMLS, I've been there a little over 7 years. There was an open cooperative agreement that IMLS had with this organization called the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. And a woman from that organization came into our office to meet up with me for the first time. Her name was Angela Seifer. She strong-armed me. She took me to the side. She said, "This is important work. We need your help." We were able to fund a project with NDIA called the Digital Inclusion Group. And very proud of Nicole Umayam, especially, who was then working for the State Library of Arizona and has done great work with tribal communities and is now a part of the federal government as a federal program officer. This program was very successful. We sponsored 5 people at state libraries and museums, and Nicole became a rock star. Next slide, please. Small and rural libraries. We are really interested in trying to create better and more robust and less burdensome, less onerous opportunities for small and rural libraries to apply for federal funding. I think it was 2019, 2020, we created a program called Accelerating Promising Practices for Small Libraries. It was still a federal grant program. We were able to reduce the full proposal page count to 6 to 8 pages rather than 10 pages. This was cohort-based. We had mentor organizations. There were 3 tracks, including digital inclusion, community memory, and school libraries. I led the digital inclusion cohort. We had 10 libraries in the first round and 4 in the second round. I will say that this work meant a lot of hand holding for me because the lack of capacity for a lot of these organizations to keep up with the process of applying for federal grants, implementing federal grants was a burden. And there was a lot of lack of knowledge and expertise. The mentor organization was Kansas City Public Library, which did a great job of leading the digital inclusion cohort. IMLS is still in the process of completely figuring out some of the lessons that we learned from this effort, and we will be hopefully introducing something in the next couple of years that will focus on rural and small libraries. Next slide, please. The State Library of North Carolina in 2018 funded a really interesting project through the State Library of North Carolina, focusing on the homework gap, how students were being, challenged by the fact that they might not have devices, might not have access to the internet at home. This is another great touchstone with the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, because this project in North Carolina hired a digital inclusion librarian. Her name is Abby Waldron, who now works for the National Digital Inclusion Alliance. We would love to see more work in this area. The Homework Gap project in North Carolina was very successful, and I believe they've hired another digital inclusion librarian. Next slide, please. Many of you are probably familiar with the Digital Navigator model. I was very pleased to work with the Salt Lake City Public Library beginning in 2020, right at the start of the pandemic, with what is known as an out-of-cycle grant. This did not come through us through our normal discretionary programs, but was a part of the work and idea of our former director, Crosby Kemper. But Salt Lake City did a very fine job of a truly replicable model that has become quite impactful in our field, as I'm sure you well know. And the two organizations that made that possible, in addition to Salt Lake City itself, were NDIA, the National Digital Inclusion Alliance, and the Urban Libraries Council. They had great marketing and great communications, and we all know that Digital Navigator programs are with us and will be with us for a while. Next slide, please. We are also interested in experimental innovation and exploratory technology. IMLS funded also in the early part of the pandemic a citizen broadband radio spectrum project with the New York Public Library across all 5 boroughs, using CBRS, citizen broadband radio spectrum, to deliver internet service into local neighborhoods through Wi-Fi hotspot lending and device lending. Next slide, please. IMLS is continually focusing on E-rate. I'll say no more. You'll be hearing more in the future. Next slide, please. So digital inclusion is important because it's a part of workforce development, economic development, telehealth, and maintenance of medical and health information, and leads to transformation for our communities. Next slide, please. Some of the things you should think about as you're assessing your community needs is trying to have some strategic foresight, taking in signals, listening to signals that are centered around technology that can come from a number of different places: education, infrastructure, environment, the economy, public health. Next slide, please. We're interested in developing not only digital literacy and skills training for our publics, but being certain that librarians themselves are digitally literate and can carry out information literacy and digital literacy training for their publics. Next slide, please. Again, I want to emphasize that you need to really begin to think about the timeline of IMLS funding. The notice of funding opportunity will be available in mid to late July. The applications will be due mid to late September. Be sure that you contact a program officer should you be interested in applying to IMLS. Next slide, please. Thank you so much. I hope that we might be able to take an additional 5 minutes for some questions and answers, or however long anybody wants to stay on the call. I am definitely online quite a bit, LinkedIn, Twitter, mostly. Kate's information, I'm sure, will be shared with you all. I think she put it in the chat.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, James and Kate. And like James said, if people can stick around, I will leave the line open for a few minutes if anybody has questions. Otherwise, we can definitely continue this conversation on Connect. Emily or I will be posting the slides and contact information there, as well as the recording. So definitely check for that later this week. But yeah, I think it sounds like at least James is willing to stick around for a couple minutes if anyone has any questions.
Maybe just a comment, James. I was for the last 3 years I was voluntold to be the grant writer, and so through the process of grant writing, I've become better at it. Obviously, after 3 years, right? We were able to get a grant for VR headsets. That worked out pretty well, and someone else, I handed that project over to someone else, so that worked out. But one of the things that I was looking at is how the grant process works. You know, I try to take what we do and I try to make it more efficient. And one of the things I'm noticing is that it's easy to get grants. Well, not easy, but you can get grants for stuff. You can get for equipment, and you can get grants for events and programs. Those seem to be relatively, straightforward. One of the problems is getting grants for part-time help or for help to do things. And it isn't, and the problem isn't so much the grant itself, it's the environment in which the grant is being written. And so if you are in an environment where the support is great, you have nothing to worry about. They're all behind you, everything's going forward. But if you're in an environment where let's just say that they're not proactive, biopic or LGBTQ or just something's going on that you just can't seem to get that grant through. And there's a pattern of that. One of the holdups I think is, and maybe we can just think about it, is that the grant process, if we could go beyond the grant process that we have now and make it so that we could get around that. So this is my opinion. Obviously, never bring the problem unless you have the answer, right? Okay. I really think that if we could have more meritorious grants where people can get a list of folks that are doing great work, or have them report what they're doing. If those grants were just basically awarded, do you know what I mean? Then it's difficult for an administrator to say, no, you can't have that money, because then they'd have to say why you can't have that money. So these are some thoughts that I've had after maybe 4 times. I've written 4 grants and turned down by 3. When I mean turned down, meaning that the provost wouldn't sign off on them.
Yeah, I mean, you're speaking to something I see quite frequently in my work. Staffing is an issue, capacity is an issue, but support and institutional buy-in. And I know many librarians who've said to me, I'd love to do X, Y, and Z at my library, but I doubt that my library director or the board or administrators won't buy in and support. It's, of high value for the culture and ethos of a library to be supportive of staff who want to explore funding. So you're right, and I'm glad to know that you're working around that solution or working to find a solution to that effort. But IMLS is very much aware that, not everybody is going to be able to apply for an IMLS grant. But there are also a lot of misconceptions about what IMLS is interested in. People think that it has to be innovative and creative and brand new and all kind of flashing, buzzy, type of scenarios, but we're also very much interested in the basics
Yeah.
and providing support. And staffing is an issue.
Yeah.
Kate, did you want to say something?
Something that I have found really interesting in some of the philanthropy circles that we're in conversation with is community foundations and some regional associations of grant makers wanting to triangulate with organizations to help support their capacity and their readiness to receive federal funding. And I don't know if that's something that's available in your community, but I know that that's something that some grant makers are really thinking about and how to, because their funding, because philanthropic dollars like that are more flexible and can possibly more often go to support staffing, go towards supporting capacity and increasing that organizational readiness to receive federal funding, because federal funding is usually coming in at such a bigger level than most organizations are ready for. And yeah, so it creates that issue. I had that when I was at at the college, I was being told to go pursue these grants in one hand, and on the other hand I was like, okay, I'm applying for this grant, it's $1 million, and everybody's like, whoa, we can't spend $1 million.
Right.
So it's this really a fun push-pull, but there are some philanthropists that are really interested, I think, in helping problem solve that with local orgs, so that could be one place to start that conversation, so you can try to build up some support there. But yeah, it's a real problem. It's a real problem.
And then most of the folks that work for it